Well, welcome back to the Money Wisdom Podcast, powered by Johnson Brunetti. My name is Jake Dozer, certified financial planner and one of the advisors in our Connecticut area, and I'm joined by my colleague, Nick. Nick, introduce yourself for our listeners, if you would.
Jake, thank you. It's good to be back with you again. My name is Nick Colantuono. I'm a certified financial planner up here in our Boston office. And it's worth mentioning at the top of this, Jake, folks, if you're out there and you haven't liked or subscribed to this podcast yet, please make sure to do it. We don't want anyone to miss any of this awesome content that we're putting out there. So please like and subscribe to the channel, and you'll just be hearing more of us.
Very good. Yeah, absolutely. You know, Nick, today on our podcast, what we have in front of us is a question from one of our listeners. And yeah, here's the question. It's, my wife and I are thinking of moving to a state that doesn't have state income tax. And we're thinking ding, 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 because, you know, that's so many of the conversations that we have in Connecticut and Massachusetts. And he continues by saying, we're both 64 and plan on retiring when we are 66. Do you think that this would be helpful, or am I overthinking it? And I think that's a good question. I think it shows a lot of insight to say, you know, am I overcomplicating this? Where do I start? So Nick, I mean, where does this person, this couple need to start as they're thinking about this process?
Yeah, it is, like you said, Jake, it is a common conversation that we're having with folks. I mean, you're in the state of Connecticut. We're up here in Massachusetts, two very high cost of living areas, two very high tax states. Most folks, you know, they're up here for work, or they're up here for, you know, maybe they work at one of the hospitals in the area or something like that. But all of a sudden you retire, you don't need the same proximity to Boston, or you don't need the same proximity to Hartford, right? You can afford to be a little farther out. And maybe that means you're in a state with a significantly lower tax rate. Mm-hmm. Keep in mind, you know, it's not just about the taxes. It's about what do you do, right? What are you doing with yourself? A lot of our clients are up here because they've got kids and grandkids, because they've got their lives, or they want the proximity to the healthcare and to the education and to the airport if they like to travel. So sure, you could be in a place where maybe a little more of your paycheck is getting put in the bank every month. But if that means you're spending more money, to travel, or to, you know, fly up here to see kids or grandkids, maybe it's a net, you know, maybe it's a net at the end of the day. So there's a lot more that goes into it, as you're obviously aware of.
Yeah. And that's a great point. I always start with that exact point with clients. I'm talking about the practical is, yes, I understand. Let's get to dollars and cents. But before we get there, asking ourselves, what is retirement going to look like? Am I moving there, and am I going to stay there? You know, if it's going to be the Carolinas or Florida or Texas, you know, Florida and Texas are common places in New Hampshire because there's no state income tax. The Carolinas, particularly South Carolina, is very popular because extremely low state income tax and a low cost of living, which is true of Texas as well. Florida, since these recent storms, isn't quite as favorable with the cost of living, but it is cheaper than Connecticut and Mass. And then another popular location that I see a lot of folks thinking about is New Hampshire, because there's no state income tax, although real estate taxes are quite a bit higher in New Hampshire. Yeah, that's right. And it's a lot colder too. So many factors to consider beyond just a simple tax piece. So I guess to our listener, my short answer, and then we'll hop into a little bit more here. My short answer is I think that you might not be overthinking it, but I think you're probably oversimplifying it. So Nick, let's hop into some specifics. What does state income tax look like in Massachusetts?
Yeah, well, look, all the clients that we're working with, they've typically got a few sources of income. Maybe it's a pension, Social Security, rental income. Every dollars that our clients earn, of course, unless it was a, you know, specific type of a pension or, you know, specific type of an investment spitting off income, our clients are paying both federal and state taxes on income. And the tax rate here in Massachusetts, right around 5%. Mm-hmm. And of course, any income that you take is obviously then going to be subject to your federal rates. What about Connecticut? A little higher than that, right?
Yeah, Connecticut tops out at 6.99. It's graduated, meaning just like the federal tax rates, the more income you make, the higher you go in that. Is that true in Massachusetts as well? Forgive my ignorance.
No, it's just a flat. Yep. Flat rate.
Gotcha. So that actually probably translates, if listeners are kind of picking up on this, that Massachusetts actually probably taxes lower or moderate income earners higher because they're hitting 5% immediately versus
Sure.
Connecticut graduating slowly into that. But that's a whole
That's
different
interesting.
topic.
Yeah.
But with Connecticut, we were talking before the podcast, and I thought it was so critical to share, is back in 2022, just a couple years ago, they passed a new rule with state income tax that a lot of people don't know about and haven't gotten clarity on because it wasn't super broadcasted, which I was surprised by. And that's this, that starting in 2026, Social Security, and this is as the time of this podcast publication, and they've talked about making some revisions, but Social Security, pensions, annuities, and pre-tax retirement withdrawals, such as 401ks and IRAs that aren't Roth, they're talking about if your income is below $75,000 as a single person of adjusted gross income, or if you have $100,000 or less of adjusted gross income as a married couple, you won't pay those taxes on those things that I just mentioned at the state level. So really, a lot of our clients try to focus on, and a lot of the tax planning that we do, which we'll talk about a bit more in a moment, is there a way for us to keep below those thresholds so that state tax is a moot issue? Obviously, again, back to what you shared, Nick, is that state taxes are only one piece of it, and Connecticut and particularly Eastern Mass near Boston, but all over, the real estate taxes are heavy. So taxes are a multifaceted animal. But I think that so many folks need to, again, take that big picture look into the whole ball of wax with retirement. And with that being said, I think a good place for people to get started with that is starting to set a vision of retirement. And we have a resource that we can give to those listeners who are here with us today to start that. And that's the Are You Ready to Retire Starter Kit. And so if you want to get your hands on that, simply text the word KIT, K-I-T, to our number 800-757-0436, and we'll get the Are You Ready to Retire Starter Kit in your hand. You'll also find that information in our show notes. What else do we need to be thinking about, Nick?
Well, look, of course, there's a lot that goes into it. And, you mentioned one of those kind of the nuances of the Connecticut state income tax rates. And we've got a similar thing up here in Massachusetts, but it doesn't really apply to a lot of the folks we're working with. We introduced what was called a millionaire's tax. And of course, a lot of the folks we're working with might have $1 million in assets, but this is a surtax that gets assessed on income if it's over $1 million.
Right.
So not an asset-based tax. It's more of an income-based tax. And it's not huge, right? But if you have over $1 million in income, Massachusetts will actually hit you with a 4% surtax on that income. So, I mean, here you are, right? If you're already in that, $1 million or more, you could actually be paying right around like 9% in state income tax.
Wow.
Keep in mind that additional 4 only hits the dollars above the million. So yeah, I mean, certainly we are having these conversations all the time because a lot of people look out at these other states, again, one that neighbors us to our north where there's no state income tax. But what do you have? You got higher real estate values. You got a mud season that lasts, 5 years. You've got bugs that are bigger than my torso, right? So again, nothing against New Hampshire. My brother-in-law and my sister-in-law are up there and we love visiting them, but there are certain times a year we don't go. And, it's good for ski season, but, I know what their tax rates are and they're a lot higher than the income tax that we're paying here in Massachusetts. So, the overarching theme here, Jake, is there's nothing for nothing in this world, right? If you're in a high taxed area, it probably means you've got some good access to healthcare, some good public transportation, or you're not having to replace tires on your car every other month because you're hitting potholes. And, so little things mean a lot when it comes to the quality of the life you have. And, oftentimes I at least like living by this here in Massachusetts. I mean, you kind of get what you pay for, right? We live in a beautiful area. It's a great place to call home, but there's a cost associated with it, of course.
Right.
But what we also see is, our clients tend to have higher, asset values. Their homes are worth more because it's a place where people want to live. And generally speaking, you get a job in this area, the salaries are a little higher because they have to compensate for those higher costs of living and higher tax rates. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah. And so I think to summarize everything, you have to be thinking about what is my lifestyle going to look like? Am I traveling back and forth back to New England or back to the state I live in? And I relocated to save money, but now I'm spending more money to get back. Am I living somewhere where I have community? We didn't even touch on that, but that's so critical. Loneliness and isolation is a huge threat in retirement, especially as one gets older. You have to ask yourself what kind of taxes, but not just state taxes, state taxes, other surcharged penalties, real estate taxes. But you have to ask yourself, what about access to medical? That's particularly poignant here in New England, where medical is much of a higher caliber than a lot of other places in the country. So many more things to think about. There's a lot of meat on the bones left on this conversation, but we'll save that for our next episode. Thank you for tuning in to the Money Wisdom Podcast, powered by Johnson Brunetti. We'll see you next time.
Investment advisory services offered through JB Capital LLC. Insurance products offered through JN Financial LLC.